our presentation today on AI is here to stay, ways to address and embrace the emerging and evolving AI landscape in healthcare settings. We have two phenomenal speakers here today, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce them to you. First up, we have Sally. She is a Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer with nearly 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry. Known for being a dynamic and transformational leader, Sally excels at thinking outside the box to develop innovative solutions. With a solid background in health information management, revenue cycle management, and compliance, Sally brings a well-rounded perspective that enhances her ability to design efficient, compliant workflows. Her expertise in these critical areas ensures that Sally can navigate the complexities of healthcare regulations while optimizing operational efficiency and maintaining high standards of privacy and security. Passionate about driving organizational change, Sally believes that aligning team organizational culture is key to achieving success. She is dedicated to fostering an environment where collaboration, transparency, and shared values empowers teams to deliver their best work. By integrating compliance initiatives with the overall strategic goals of the organization, Sally ensures that compliance is not just a requirement, but a vital part of the company's culture, leading to improved outcomes and sustained growth. Her commitment to aligning people and processes underpins Sally's reputation as a leader who drives meaningful change and innovation. I always think it's best to get to know your speakers a little more personally. So as you can see here, some other fun facts about Sally. She's an alumni from East Carolina University, Go Pirates. She works for Roper St. Francis, based out of Charleston, South Carolina. If you didn't know this already, she is president of South Carolina HEMA chapter, and she often describes herself as a tired mom because she's got a 4-year-old at home. Our other speaker today is Mickey Jernigan. Mickey has over 24 years of privacy and compliance experience in the higher education, healthcare, and technology industries, including over 14 years as Chief Privacy Officer. Mickey's expertise includes healthcare and institutional compliance, HIPAA, high-tech, FERPA, GDPR, FTC, GLBA, state privacy laws, incident investigation, data governance, data security, conflict of interest, excluded party screening, and contracting. Whew, I got all those right. Okay, Mickey currently serves as the SVP of Privacy and Compliance and the Chief Privacy Officer at Genzion, overseeing the Compliance Pro Solutions product, ensuring the growth and development of the privacy and compliance service lines. Mickey's prior roles include the Chief Privacy Officer at UNC Chapel Hill and the Chief Compliance Officer and Chief Privacy Officer at other universities, academic medical centers, and health systems. Mickey has served on and led data governance, cybersecurity compliance, privacy, and enterprise risk management committees. Mickey also has experience conducting risk assessments, breach analysis, investigations, process improvement efforts, third-party and vendor reviews, as well as creating policies and procedures. Mickey is a frequent speaker and active within several industry organizations. Some fun facts about Mickey is that she's an active alumni from the University of Oklahoma. She resides in Greenville, North Carolina, and unlike Sally, she's on the other end of the spectrum, and her and her husband are empty nesters. So please give a warm welcome to both of our speakers today, and I will turn it over to Mickey to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great introduction. The first thing we'll go over is our agenda. The first thing Sarah already took care of for us are welcome and introductions. The next things we're going to talk about are key takeaways. We'll define some types of artificial intelligence, talk about the differences between non-generative artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence. We'll give you some examples of AI in healthcare. Then we're going to talk about how we have discovered AI usage in healthcare, the specific role of privacy officers and compliance officers dealing with AI in healthcare. We will guide you through establishing some privacy guardrails, establishing procedures to help you follow those guardrails, and then we'll wrap up with some questions and answers. Our key takeaways from today's sessions are to help you discover ways that artificial intelligence could already be in use at your institution without oversight or adequate controls. We'll help you understand options for embracing appropriate uses for artificial intelligence at your institution, and possible opportunities to obtain buy-in for controls. We're also going to discuss ways to elevate privacy reviews of AI prior to initiation. The basic definition of artificial intelligence from Oxford Languages Dictionary is what it says on this slide. It's the theory and development of computer systems that are able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. We're going to start with non-generative AI because this is the one that's much more likely to be in place at your institution. And this is something that has likely been around for quite a while. And we didn't even think of it as artificial intelligence. But non-gen AI is a type of AI that analyzes and classifies existing data but does not create new content. It recognizes patterns and makes predictions based on these patterns. There are several types of models. One is a classification model, and it categorizes data into predefined categories. One example is email spam filters that we all have, and we always have to go in and look to make sure it didn't catch something it shouldn't have. But what those spam filters do is classify emails as spam or not spam based on what's in the email, maybe an attachment, maybe a link. There's also a regression model. It predicts continuous numerical values. For instance, a housing price prediction model might estimate the price of your house or a house based on its features, size, location, etc. Another type is a recommendation system. It's really popular on platforms like Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, where recommendation systems use non-gen AI to analyze your listening and watching behavior to suggest new shows or songs or artists that you might want to review or follow. There are also fraud detection systems. Many financial institutions, and healthcare has started using this, but it primarily began in financial institutions, employ non-gen AI models to identify possible fraudulent transactions by analyzing patterns in data. And that could be patterns across their system or patterns specific to your activity in your accounts. One that's very highly used in some healthcare organizations are medical diagnosis tools. Again, non-gen AI to help doctors or other clinical professionals diagnose diseases by analyzing medical images. It first began with MRIs and X-rays to see what patterns could be found. And then a final version is Coursera. It's an online learning platform that uses non-gen AI algorithms to personalize course recommendations for learners based on their past course selections and performance. And then, of course, we get to Gen AI. That's the one that a lot of us think of when we think of AI, but it's really something that's been slowly adopted in the healthcare setting for good reason. A lot of data that could be placed in Gen AI is highly regulated and highly sensitive. But Gen AI is the creation of new content or outputs based on learning, logic, and training. Gen AI is, like I said, not currently widely used in healthcare organizations, but it will be before we know it. For today's presentation, we are going to discuss types of AI that may exist in healthcare settings. And we've given you a baseline of the difference between non-Gen AI and Gen AI to help us imagine things that are going on in your organizations. Key differences between the two are that the purpose for Gen AI, like we said, is to create new content. Non-Gen AI is analysis and decision-making. The output for Gen AI could be original music, text, images, even code. But non-Gen AI keeps parameters around classification, prediction, and recommendations. And the strengths of Gen AI are creativity, content generation, and innovation. But non-Gen AI has its pluses too. It has pattern recognition, decision making, even predictions. Applications for Gen AI include content creation, as we've stated several times, marketing, design, and even customer service. And non-Gen AI helps with fraud detection, healthcare diagnoses, risk assessment, and personalizations. I'll turn it over to Sally to talk about AI uses in healthcare versus other industries.
Thank you, Mickey. Good afternoon or evening, everyone. It is great to be able to spend a little bit of time with you. So one of the things we wanted to talk about when we start looking at AI, when we think about it in healthcare, we think a lot about how we use it in healthcare and what we can do to utilize AI. But AI is not just done in healthcare. There's lots of other areas that are using AI. So I live with a computer engineer. My husband is a computer engineer, and they use AI in a lot of the different areas of function that his organization is responsible for. But the graph on this slide is going to give you an idea of all the different areas of which may be using AI. So some of them may be areas that you are a consumer of, or maybe didn't even think about in instances of AI use. I'll call out just a few to give you some examples. I will talk a little bit about security. So, as Sarah mentioned, I am an East Carolina pirate, and Mickey lives in Greenville. And if you guys remember, some years ago, there was, and you may have to Google if you're not from North Carolina or Eastern North Carolina, there was an instance where a security software system that was being used at East Carolina detected that there was a gun on campus. And so an all points bulletin went out. Everyone was looking for this individual who had a gun. They locked down buildings. They had the Greenville Police Department in place. When they found the individual, it was not a gun. It was just a very long umbrella. And so they were using a system to help them detect for weapons. So that's sort of an example, albeit not a great one, of an error that can come out of AI, but an example of how security departments or police departments may be using AI to help assist them in monitoring areas. And my health system, we have a security system that we use that uses our cameras to detect whether someone may have come in with a weapon. That gives another sense of security when we think about workplace violence, and also protecting our patients, but without having a person feel like they're being screened, or the presence of it being real in having to walk through a metal detector. So that's just an example of some AI tools that could be helpful on the security side. And when you think about transportation, manufacturing, any or industry where you might be purchasing a service, they're using different types of AI to either push things to you, and we'll get a little bit into this later on in the presentation, but how many of you have talked about a trip to England, and the next thing you know, on your Facebook there are ads for England, or you Googled something maybe on your phone or on your computer, and you start getting ads for that in your social media. That's the use of cookies and analyzing your search history and using AI to know what you may or may not be interested in purchasing. So you're seeing AI a lot in different areas, and not just in healthcare, and for different purposes. So when we start looking at what non-generative AI is going to look like in healthcare, there's lots of different areas that you can use non-generative HI in healthcare. And I'm going to talk through a few examples in a few minutes, but let's kind of just talk about how we may or may not be using artificial intelligence within healthcare. If you think about all the different areas that we have data, the different data elements that we could pull from, how we could automate some of the things that we do on a regular basis. And one thing that we could think about is the the introduction of an EHR and the use of macros and templates and smart phrases, dot phrases, all those kinds of things that come along with an EHR that gives me some gray hair in thinking about making sure we've met medical necessity from a documentation standpoint. But those are all tools that we can use to really help us work smarter, not harder. That's what my daddy has always said, work smarter, not harder. And some of these non-gen AI tools can help us with that. So from a compliance perspective, we're always looking at how we can do more with less. So really being able to use a system that may be able to review contracts and look at a contract to determine whether a BAA would be necessary for that contract. That's something that a non-generative AI tool could do. One of the things that we're looking at in our organization, just as recent as just this past week, is we're looking at an AI tool that will take our policies and compare them against regulations that are in the state of South Carolina to make sure that our policies are matching up with what's in the regulation. It's not generating anything for us. It's not going to go out and look across all of the web and make sure that our policy aligns with every other health system in the country and write our policy. It's just confirming that what we have written in this one section matches what's written in the reg. And so that's just an example of how you're able to use some of these non-generative AI tools to really help you do things that in the past you might have had a person do. So we would have dictated into some sort of recording device or used a phone in the past, and someone would have taken in that information and typed it all out. With the use of an EHR, now those providers are able to do a lot of that work themselves. There's a lot less need for transcriptionists, just like some of the more rote or mundane, I hate to call them that, tasks that are very repetitive. The tasks are repetitive. Those tasks can sometimes be looked at from an AI or non-generative AI perspective. And we're using those, on a regular basis. They're not services or skills that we haven't used in the past. A lot of these things are things that we do, on a quick and easy route. We can teach a machine that every time someone puts in a request in MyChart for a billing question, we can queue all that up to go to the right people. And some of that maybe is using AI, and some of that is machine learning. But we're able to take that information and route it to where it needs to go, or start some of the work that needs to happen in order to get the job done. You're seeing some of this a little bit kind of coming into play with some things that EHRs. I know Epic is rolling out with some non-generative AI that's going to be in the provider's inbox. So we're starting to see this kind of come more and more. And what's really kind of scary about all of it is it's all unregulated. So there's no rule in place that says you can only use AI for this, but not for that. But it's giving us kind of the creative freedom to use AI in the best ways that we see possible for our organization and our departments. We are seeing some change here with Section 1557, which talks about discrimination, in that we're having to call out specifically when we are using AI, that we're making sure that it is accounting for folks' ability to understand what we've used AI to produce. So if you are using ChatGPT, which is a generative AI, to write a memo that you're going to send to your patients, or a letter that you're going to send to your patients, or you're using some form of generative AI, you're going to have to make sure that you've covered that from the language process. That's a Section 1557 rule. But you're able to, or at least that's the only real rule that's starting to kind of dip its toe into AI. It's so vast. It's just hard to kind of reel it in and really regulate it at its point today. All right, so I'm sure that most of you guys have an EMR. I think probably everyone has an EMR today. But did you know that you have a AI in your EMR? And there's a lot of things that we use to create efficiencies in EMRs or EHRs that allow us to really focus on being able, again, to do more with less. So I gave the example of, or talked about the ability to build some AI into the provider's inbox. Some of the things that we're seeing come from EHRs is that initial review of a patient's message into the provider's queue to say, hey, this patient's just asking for medications. Let's send that down that route. Or this patient is asking for an appointment. Let's send that to the schedulers. And so it's able to triage a little bit. I think we're going to start to see that kind of work become more and more frequent, where we're going to almost be able to anticipate what a patient might ask for or need based on the AI's review of a patient's medical record. Now, are we there yet? Absolutely not. We've got a lot more training and work that needs to occur with AI before we can get to the point where we're completely turning it loose in someone's medical record. But we do have the ability to use AI in EHRs. And then your EHR should have some sort of built-in predictor. So, we're talking about it being able to predict and anticipate what the patient might need and be able to respond to the patient's needs as far as, hey, this looks like this patient's going to run out of their prescription. And then an AI tool maybe could queue up the prescription into the provider's inbox to sign and send to the pharmacy. But there are some really cool things that are already in place that are helping predict readmission risks. So you're looking at, we all get kind of charged or dinged or reviewed on whether or not the patient is coming back into the hospital within a certain amount of time. So you're able to use some AI tools in your EMR that will allow you to predict whether you think that patient may have a readmission. It also helps create a plan or outline a checklist or points that you can look at for patients who are following down a path where they might lead to sepsis or some sort of infection, that you're able to take the data that you've got on the patient and compare it to the data or trends from other patient information to really be able to predict that, hey, I think this patient might have sepsis, or this patient, it looks like if they keep trending in this direction that they're going to get sepsis. And so it creates that flag, or it sends that BPA is what they call it in Epic, best practice alert. And it alerts that provider to know, hey, we have a problem, or we may have a problem if we don't make action. So if you think about in your car, or at least in my car does this, I've always, if you haven't met me, I'm super short. And so it's hard for me to kind of see over the hood sometimes, and especially in the back. So I've always had a car for a long time that at least does the beep beep when I'm backing up, or it beeps and lets me know. But now my car beeps and tells me on the front. And so it's giving me that alert that, Sally, you're about to back into something, or Sally, you're about to hit something on the front. So it's the same kind of thought, in that some of these AI tools that are built in or being built into our EMR are really able to help give us an alert to say, hey, this may happen. Now, those non-generative AI tools that are giving us those alerts aren't perfect. They're still learning. Their data is still learning. They're learning off of data that is not, may or may not be applicable to all groups of individuals within an area. But they are able to start giving some predictive analytics or predictive alerts to let us know that, hey, this patient might be going down a path that we need to divert and get them back over to this other area. Or, we've seen this happen in the past, and it just is able to analyze that data at a much faster clip than we could do it as a person, and allows us to kind of free up our time to do other more important things than kind of tracking data and trending data. The next part of EMR that I think is really cool, and I like talking about these kinds of things and I'll try not to geek out too much with you guys, but is using natural language processing, or NLP. And so your EMR uses that as well. So what natural language processing does is it uses abstract free text, and it gives you something based on that. So it's kind of like saying, when you were in school, you remember you would write a paper and your teacher would send it back to you and they would have all these edits in it. And I wouldn't say it this way, I would say it that way. Or I've read through this and I've learned so much. If you've done any research or you read articles or getting your continuing education units, you're reading a document and you're processing it, and you're sometimes giving something back. That's sort of what natural language processing is doing. So it's looking at free text and it's making a decision or providing a solution or a response based on what it reads. So it's not necessarily going out into the world and bringing something back with a solution. It's just saying, based on the information you gave me, this is what I think you should do, or this is what I think you should get. So what we see here is a lot of our computer assisted coding devices, our CACs systems, are really using that natural language processing to really be able to kind of hone in on maybe things that we would have missed for reading, or giving us the ability to capture all of the charges or all of the potential codes for that surgery or that procedure or on that service. And it gives us the ability to really focus on, some much bigger pieces. So, if you think about, if you guys are coders, you can think about, you get these. I used to be a cardiology coder. So when I would code, I'd see an echo report. It was the same echo report over and over again. I'd see a cath report. It was the same cath report over and over again. And so you start to see those templates and you start to learn where to look to get the codes that you want to code from. And it gets really easy to kind of get into the habit of, I know this provider documents is the same exact way, but what that CAC and what that natural language processing does is we can teach it to go out and look for all of these things. And so it might catch something if that provider dropped in a sentence that wasn't in the right place and I didn't completely read the note all the way through because I'm only looking in these, particular areas. It might catch something that we as a human missed. And so that's kind of where that natural language processing comes in. Um, you're going to see some natural language processing with your Alexa device. So I usually have an Alexa device sitting on my desk. I don't have it on today because it would have said, how may I help you? But that ambient listening, what's happening on your phone when you're sitting near it, you've probably seen TikToks or Reels where someone goes up to someone's phone and says things that you want it to start showing on their search history or in their ads. And I've guilty of doing that myself. Leave your phone near me and who knows what you might start seeing on ads. But that's natural language processing, and that's what its purpose is. Its purpose is to look at where we have some areas. So if we keep talking through, whether or not we think artificial intelligence is worth the risk, when we look at the different parts of artificial intelligence, and we've talked about how EHRs have kind of done away with a transcriptionist role, there are some things I think that artificial intelligence may be able to take over, but there's still going to need to be a person to confirm its accuracy. So yes, it may be able to take a lot of information and pull it all together and put it in a nice, beautiful picture for us. It's still going to require us to review it to make sure it's accurate. So trust but verify. I've said that a few times today already. That it's going to be, there's going to be a position and a role in place that's going to give us or require us to go through and look at this data because again, it is just what it's been able to learn. So, there are there's still the need to look and make sure that what was written in this note really does match what we think the medical decision making should be. So if you've ever typed in a chat GPT, here are my symptoms, tell me if I have this, I've done that. And it comes back and it'll say, I'm not a physician, you should see a physician. But here's what I think. So, there's still got to be someone that checks through that. It's not looking at the fact that I am a white female that might be different than an African American male who's younger or older than me. It's not taking all of those different um, differences between race and gender, age. It's not understanding that. It's just saying in general this could be your problem. So that's where we've got to have the person in place. So does that mean that people lose jobs? Probably in the sense that they currently have, but the job morphs and changes into something a lot more analytical and looking at different roles. There's a lot of rewards in using AI. If you're not already using it in some of your workflows, you're going to start to see that become more and more and more frequent. We're looking at the rewards in AI. It really helps us to focus on more patient facing, people facing uh, activities. It gives us the ability to focus on that hands-on part and let the data stuff kind of calculate and alert us in the back end. It will help with population health because we can use it to look at social determinants of health, to gauge where someone in one or groups of people in a certain zip code may respond or may not respond or have access to physicians or insurance or medications, or they can't get to work or they can't get access to clean food, clean water or food. It gives us that ability to look at a lot of data and analyze it very quickly to know where we need to put resources. It's going to obviously help with cost because we're going to be able to look at things in a more holistic viewpoint. And when a lot of times I get this when I think about reducing cost, I think, oh my gosh, this means getting rid of people. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. It's looking at how we can reduce maybe some overhead costs from supplies or ensuring that we're billing for things correctly. It's not necessarily getting rid of people in seats, but more so being more efficient.
We had a great question come in from the audience, Sally. So, what are some of the most common ethical pitfalls in AI implementation in healthcare, and how can compliance professionals proactively mitigate them?
What a great question. A very long question. So, I think some of the most common ethical pitfalls that are with AI is kind of what we just talked about. It's the inability of AI to know who Sally Biscuit Jar is versus Mickey Jernigan, or versus someone who maybe has a different disease complex than I do. So, it's looking at data, kind of holistically. So if you're using it, if you are a physician, and maybe I'll give this story. I have family who live in Santiago, Chile. I have two cousins who are graduating next March from their residency, and they're going out where they're going to be doctors. And so when we were with them in March of this year, a lot of the stuff we talked about, they're like, oh yeah, just type my answers to my questions into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT tells me what the answer is. And they were very surprised to hear us say, you can't do that. You can do that, but you need to understand that if you're talking, like, this is giving you just a very general response. It doesn't know that your patient is 62 versus 18 versus 12, whatever. It doesn't know that that patient has 4 other comorbidities on top of this question you're asking. So it's not looking at the holistic patient. It's not applying all of those things. So from a patient care perspective and your promise to give that information, there's some ethical pitfalls there. And then, of course, sharing proprietary or patient-related PHI in ChatGPT, that ChatGPT or any other kind of like AI tool is like putting your information out on a billboard. I was always told, my grandmother would always tell me, you don't tell something to somebody you don't want out on a billboard. You don't post on Facebook unless you want it to be out on a billboard. Essentially that's what it is, right? So, AI is the same kind of way. You don't want to upload, you don't want to use it for meeting minutes unless it's, HIPAA compliant, you're using a tool that's been approved by your organization, and you're ethically responsible for what's going in there from your organization's standpoint. So, those are just things that you can kind of think through, and it's reminding people of that, right? How do you get around that pitfall is really just making sure that you have trained people on what AI is, how it kind of ties into their everyday job and what they're using it for, and reminding them of that. So you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. So it's just some ways for you to kind of think through it in a different way. but does give you the ability to kind of keep it in people's forefronts. We've spent a lot of time talking about phishing and don't click on links and don't provide your credentials and don't do, things to give information to people that they don't need, that aren't, people And AI is kind of the same way. When it's really no different than any other phishing incident. People are able to get that information out of ChatGPT. I could type into any kind of AI system and Google a person just probably like you could Google on Google. So I think being able to mitigate ethical pitfalls is really more just in general knowledge of how AI works.
Thanks, Sarah, for that question. So now we're going to move on to discovering AI usage in your organization. Since we've discussed several places already that it can exist in healthcare, we want to share how to continue to discover other areas that may have been overlooked. What we've seen are common healthcare AI usage in data mining health records for research. Those typically go through an IRB, sometimes at your organization, sometimes external, but you may not always know how the data mining is happening. If it's an individual, that's what we're used to. But there are times, and I think it's going to be the trend, that researchers are going to employ AI models to search through those records. So you're going to have to be extremely careful with this and all of these others, that there's an approval process, which we're going to talk about a little later in the presentation, but also that any required business associate agreements and other controls are in place to protect PHI. Other places that AI comes into play, and this is similar to what Sally mentioned with the coding pieces, are other parts of the revenue cycle. So it's probably not just in coding, but also in billing, as she mentioned, discovering potential clues, sentences, other things that can help you bill more accurately for the service provided to the patient. Another option, and this is a little less concerning with PHI, unless you have a lot of PHI in your email system, which I know we all have some on the healthcare side, but data mining emails of your workforce to help train them what to do and what not to do with email. Because you're going to find a lot of examples of you go, oh my goodness, I cannot believe they are sharing this through email. Or they received this through email and clicked on a link, right? It goes both ways. Other ways are to train AI models. And while I encourage you to listen to the rest of the presentation, because we're going to talk about guardrails and protocols for these types of models specifically, that really, really need guardrails around them more than some of the others. I think most of you already probably have clinical improvement processes in place that you use non-generative AI like we've talked about. And then other internal training options could be for any staff, medical or nursing students, clinical learners of other sorts. Release of information. We've seen that starting to creep in with AI usage to do the same, the rote tasks that Sally talked about, not to replace people, but to perhaps be more efficient and allow those people to conduct more complex job functions. And then, of course, monitoring, and that can be monitoring of anything, your EHR, your billing cycle, your meeting minutes even, so to see if they get into a ChatGPT process or not. Your IT group may put in all sorts of monitoring. And then last but not least, HIEs. Everybody's attached to at least one HIE in your area now, and some organizations have multiples because their patient reach is so broad. Please remember to take a look at those, because they are certainly, just like ROI, using AI to help with the more rote processes. And then here's some not so obvious, and Sally's example earlier is already on my list, readers of facial or biometric characteristics. And that includes the things that she mentioned, like looking for possible risks, whether it might be, a weapon or an explosive device or anything of a weird or unusual shape, someone leaving a backpack at a trash can on purpose, things like that. It could be completely innocuous, could be, some sort of illegal exchange of goods, or it could be an explosive. So those are things. Others are license plate readers. Sometimes they might be just to help your parking enforcement so that people aren't parking in the wrong place or that they've paid their parking fees, or plate readers that also can find people who are not supposed to be on campus. Maybe you've had some bad actors that you've had to prohibit from returning to campus, yet here are their license plates. And then some are very easy, like generating visitor badges. Sometimes you can walk up to an unmanned desk and have a visitor badge created by sharing your photo ID.
Mhm.
And then, of course, generation of individual work, which we all have to put some guardrails around that, what we want our organizations to do. In healthcare, it's extremely important, as Sally already mentioned, that we have some sort of guideline or even policy prohibiting adding PHI or any confidential business information of your organization into Chat GPT or Microsoft Copilot, because those are publicly available AI. There is no way to get that out of there once you put information in there. And some of the biggest organizations in the country within the last 2 years have fallen prey to that, where their staff, either unknowingly or, just without care, put information in there to create something quite quickly, and then it's out in the public domain. So like Sally said, her grandma said, and all of our grandmas have said, be careful what you share with other people, because it will get out. It will not be a secret.
There was another great question that came in, Mickey. Are there any red flags or risk signals compliance officers should watch for when AI models are being rapidly scaled across departments or regions?
Sure, that's another great and very long question. And there are lots of red flags or risk signals compliance officers should watch for, but some of the ones are when something new just pops up and the compliance officer hasn't heard of it before it's implemented. That's a big red flag, because if someone hasn't taken a new product, a new vendor, a new something through the appropriate channels, which should always include your compliance and privacy officers, that's a big risk signal, because it either was pushed through without any approvals and shouldn't be in place, or it certainly is pushed through without the appropriate approvals. So when something's trying to be rapidly scaled across departments, that's always a big red flag for me. Thanks for that question, Sarah. And I guess we're going to switch back to Sally, since she's an active privacy officer today, and let her talk about the role of the privacy officer in managing AI across the organization.
Thank you, Mickey. I would also kind of tie into what you were just saying with that question. It's always a big red flag to me if I'm hearing about something on the tail end. It usually means it was probably something we shouldn't have done, or it's going to have to be completely redone or undone and put back together. And everyone hates for the compliance officer, privacy officer to have to tell you that, which is why most people don't love compliance. But if you engage us in the beginning, we're happy to help you build it out correctly from the start. So I think we all can appreciate moving at a quick pace, but let's make sure we get it right.
Right, exactly. It's not we're the office of NO, we're the office of KNOW. We want to know so that we can help you.
That's right, because we're all here for the same goal. We're all working for the same goal. Yep. Well, let's talk a little bit about privacy officers. We talk about how much everyone loves compliance and privacy. Let's talk about why you should love the role of privacy when we talk about AI. The role of the privacy officer is to make sure that we are protecting the data of the organization, not just patient information, but all other information that's available from the organization. So whether that's our financial data, proprietary information, minutes, anything that might be produced by the organization, that's the privacy officer's role in making sure that we're keeping those protected. Sometimes that role may work with an information security officer who's also looking at ways that we can keep bad actors out of our network or off of our system at our servers, but it's working hand in hand in making sure that that data is being protected. And so when we think about how that ties into AI. There's a lot of pieces in that, and making sure that folks understand what that means and how we can really play a role, all of us, in keeping information safe. And so we do that. We look at ways of maybe we're, as privacy individuals or officers, we're looking at ways that we can, guide the organization and teach folks what the privacy rules are, what the regulations say, what our policies say. A lot of times folks don't know what the policy is. And just this morning, I was talking with a physician who was asking me a question about a patient who had passed away, and they said, "Well, privacy doesn't matter once you've passed away. Once you've passed away, HIPAA no longer applies." And I was like, "That's not true." It still does. And so, folks just don't know, and they don't know what they don't know. You think of lots of things that you might not know about. I don't know anything about cars. I know where the gas pedal is, the brake pedal. I know how to put gas in my car. I could check my oil if I had to, but I don't know how the inner parts of it works. And so, you're trying to teach people what that means and how they can really learn about ways that they can help implement or safeguard information in the organization. And so that's what the privacy officer is trying to accomplish. They're looking at projects or contracts, and sometimes maybe they might use some of that non-generative AI to help with that. But they're really advising the organization on how they move forward with processes or projects and make sure that they're staying within the guardrails. And Mickey's going to talk about those guardrails here in just a few minutes, but really guiding folks to know, hey, there are guardrails in place. So when we go bowling and we pull those gutter rails up, you see them. It's an active notice to you that there's a rail in place that's going to prevent me from throwing my bowling ball in the gutter, right? And so that's kind of what the privacy officer's job is to create those gutter rails so that everyone knows they're there, and that they can use them. But they also know that, should they get too close, the ball's just going to bounce off and head back down the right path. And then maybe the guardrail is the privacy officer, but it's the rules and things that are put in place that Mickey's going to tell you guys about here in just a few minutes. So we think about the impact of AI to privacy officers. So there's a lot of impact. Think of all the things we've already talked about that could be out in the world. You hear about people that use ChatGPT to take minutes. You hear things. I use ChatGPT to help me create documents, or to help me work through some pieces of ideas or policy or something. But any information that I put in about myself, or I put about my organization, it's all of that is what ChatGPT then learns to create something else for someone else. So it's important that we have an understanding of what AI does as a privacy officer, and maybe just a little bit more than I know what ChatGPT is, or I know what natural language processing is, or I know the difference between machine learning and something else. But it's understanding all the different nuances to that and how I can use that or how we shouldn't use that, and putting policies in place and systems in place and approval processes in place that allow us to really kind of create these guardrails that Mickey's going to talk about, to give us a foundation to stand on, to help us make sure that folks understand, they're educated, they know how to play the game, they're ready to use AI, they're excited about it, they're not terrified of it, which might be the case, and that's okay. You hear the good things and the bad things about it. But hopefully we're not all going to be like in a movie, like a Terminator movie, where all these robots and AI stuff kind of comes into play anytime soon. But you should be excited about it and use it appropriately, because it does have a lot of really great aspects. Mickey, you want to talk through those guardrails?
Certainly. Thanks, Sally. So as we've kind of peppered through this presentation, Sally and I both talked about establishing privacy guardrails. So if you haven't heard it yet, we're going to say it again. We must establish privacy guardrails around any type of AI usage. And while the focus on this presentation is not about legislation, we could have a whole presentation just on that. It is one of the primary guardrails to be aware of where it exists. There are some in existence primarily in the EU and outside of the United States, and a handful of US states are working on AI legislation, but we don't have a lot of it yet in the United States. And it's as with most technology, it's developed more quickly or even under the radar and not been noticed than any regulations to govern its usage. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially for the healthcare organization that has so much highly sensitive and highly regulated data. And so when we establish privacy guardrails, while this isn't the gutter down the bowling alley, it's pretty close. It still has guardrails so you don't fall into traffic or over the edge of the bridge. So very similar to the beginning of the enforcement of the HIPAA privacy rule. Yeah, I'm dating myself, I know. But if you couldn't do it with paper records, you can't do it with electronic versions either. So that's just something to remember. And then, does your organization have learners that may be hunting and looking around in medical records and the younger generation not aware of all the requirements yet that they have to follow in the healthcare setting, as Sally's example earlier? And then, does your organization conduct or allow PHI research? That's something to always be aware of. And then the de-identification safe harbor. With big data today, it's still at risk for re-identification. So you have to really be careful when using either one of the methods for de-identification allowed under HIPAA. And with artificial intelligence, if an individual or your organization can't do it with something with sensitive data, just like I said about the beginning of the HIPAA privacy rule, AI can't do it either. So you can't, a physician can't come to me and say, oh, I thought it was okay to put into this AI learning model. I said, well, could you have done that yourself? Done all that research and put it out on the internet? And then they look at me with like 3 heads and I'm like, no, you can't do it that way either. And then some examples of privacy guardrails. I have had customers who were so, had low risk tolerance for the use of AI in their organization that they said, we're not allowing it all. And that's because they found they had some implementations across the organization that nobody had approved. Somebody had just brought in, IT didn't catch it, compliance and privacy didn't have an opportunity to review it. And so they said, none, we're shutting it all down. All access is stopped until we get our arms around it. Well, that's extreme. That's what that organization determined was best for their risk posture and their risk tolerance. And that's what I would say to all organizations. It depends on your risk posture and your risk tolerance on how much and where and when you can use AI. Another option for privacy guardrails, and this is sort of in the middle, it's allowing AI usage only after a thorough review and vetting of each application and or use case by a committee or by assigned responsible individuals. But then I believe will be the most widely adopted option is establishing allowable parameters for limited uses of AI without full review, but may require notice that, hey, we're going to start doing this. Just in case they misunderstand the requirements. Somebody at least has eyes on it, can look at it, can look at the description and look for any red flags. So in this model, we review all applications and use cases that fall outside the established parameters. Then we have periodic review of all AI applications and use cases. We review approved usage on some set criteria and review uses in place before your process went into place. After determining the appropriate path forward for your organization, you need to establish protocols or procedures to support that decision prior to initiation of future AI projects. So creating procedures, I know we all love those. We have 1 million in each healthcare organization. Some of the factors to consider for your AI policy and procedure are HIPAA, of course, ONCS requirements, HR requirements, because you may be creating something that's using employee data or cameras in hallways that collect data that might be related to employment. any other federal or state laws your organization must comply with. And then something to think about too is external use of your organization's data. You may have some vendors come to you and ask if they can beta test their product in your facility. So something to be aware of on that front. Something to always consider including in your protocol is established timeframes for when submissions are accepted and when they're reviewed. I like to compare these to IRB protocol reviews because they always have a time frame for all submissions, and then they also tell you when they expect the review to be completed. So this way people aren't calling somebody on the committee or somebody in privacy or compliance or legal and asking, every 3 days, where's their review? And then something extremely important is penalties for noncompliance. So if something happens outside the established policy and protocol or procedure, then the penalties for that individual or individuals who went around the policy should be established. And then, of course, if you want to have any exceptions or exclusions, those should be included in your privacy. And I suggest limiting those severely and having 1 or 2 individuals, your CIO, your CMO, somebody of that level on the executive cabinet to review those, because you don't want to have those happening very often if you can help it. So after determining the appropriate path forward for your organization, establish a process to review all requests pursuant to the new policy. First question, does the request comply with the new policy? Yes. Great. Move on. No. Is there a path forward? Can we adjust to meet new requirements? Great. If we can, move forward. If we cannot, then that application needs to be sunset. And if at all possible, discontinue it immediately and have your privacy and/or compliance officers review it to see if you have any issues and you have any reporting obligations. So in conclusion, protecting the privacy of your organization's data while using AI is not just a role-based responsibility. It's not just the privacy officer's responsibility. It's not just the compliance officers. It's a collective responsibility for everyone in the organization. By taking proactive steps to protect your organization's data and advocating for transparency, you can have a safer and more trustworthy AI environment for everyone. So let's work together to ensure that privacy rights and ethical behaviors are respected in the age of AI. Thank you so much for attending our session today. We appreciate your participation, and Sally and my contact information are on this last slide, as well as a QR code that goes directly to our LinkedIn page. If you have any questions that we weren't able to answer today or would like to talk to us about anything else, please contact us directly through any of those methods, and we'd be happy to share our opinions with you.
Thank you so much, ladies. Everyone have a great day.